My wife, recently, had our baby, a few days past the due date, and life has been a whirlwind. Even though things have been vastly different at home, I've managed to maintain the rules laid out by the previous homeowner. I've been trying to reach out to him to help clarify, but so far, I've had absolutely no response. I've even tried to track down family members and friends, but it's as if he's fallen off the face of the earth. What little response I get from those few people I've been able to contact via Facebook has also been less than satisfactory. Nobody's seen or heard from him since he moved. Nobody I even talked to knows where he moved to. He just vanished. During the days following my wife's release from the hospital, I haven't noticed anything strange or unexpected. In fact, I would go so far as to say that since that night in the basement, nothing out of the ordinary has happened at all. I was honestly beginning to wonder if the letter really was just some sort of prank. On the third night home, I awoke to the sounds of my son crying in the bassinet. As always, I looked up to check the time on the clock. It read exactly midnight. I got up and went to the fridge for a bottle of formula, warmed it up, and returned to my bedroom. My wife was awake by that point, but I told her to go back to sleep. I could feed the kid. Just as I finished up, I happened to look at the alarm clock again. The time was still midnight. I went to my phone and clicked on the screen to see that the time was actually 3:45 a.m. My blood turned to ice as I recalled the rule about being in bed between 3 and 4 a.m. I'd already broken one rule when we brought my son home, but now there were two. As I thought about it, I remembered looking at the microwave clock as well. It also had read midnight. I came to the conclusion then that the power must have gone out, which drew me then to the realization that the light in the basement must have been out for at least a moment or two as well. I did my best to maintain composure and remind myself that nothing strange had happened in the last little while. I told myself it was a prank and that I needn't be worried. But in my heart, I knew that I'd made a vital mistake. The next evening, as I held my son in the rocking chair, I stared into his grey eyes as they wandered curiously around the room. In them, I could see reflections of lights and shadows, and as they fell onto me, and I saw my own face reflected in my son's eyes, I caught the glimmer of something else. Behind me, standing outside the window, was the shape of another person. The baby began to cry then, and I turned around to see who was standing behind me. But there was nothing but an empty window, and behind that, nothing but the night. During the next few weeks, the general atmosphere in my home shifted. My wife seemed more irritable, and I found myself getting furious over the smallest things. I vividly recall dropping a piece of toast on the floor and being so upset about it that I stomped it into the ground and thought about burning the whole house down. I remember reading once, perhaps even on Reddit, about a phenomenon known as the call of the void. Nearly every person has experienced it sometime in their life. It's that thought you get when driving into work and you think, just for a moment, that you could drive straight on into traffic. It's a feeling of standing on the top of a building and having the urge to jump for no reason. It's when you're alone with a person whom you love more than anything, like your wife or newborn child, and you have the sudden, vivid imagery of wrapping your hands around their necks and squeezing the life out of them. It's supposed to be your brain running a sort of systems check. Experts suggest that your brain is just affirming a survival instinct, making sure that you wouldn't actually do something that would end or severely damage your life. Except, they're not supposed to happen every day, let alone several times a day, like I've seemed to have them. These thoughts just slip into my head for no reason at all. I could burn the house down. I could kill my family. I could slice my wrists open and watch their blood slip down my fingertips until the world goes black forever. Just as quickly as they came, the thoughts were gone. They went on for several weeks before I finally brought it up to my wife. I told her I kept having these dark thoughts slipping into my head without any reason. She told me she'd been having that happen too, especially when she was alone. We promised each other to try hard to get those thoughts out of our heads, and that if we couldn't stop having such dark impulses, we'd go see a therapist. That night, I awoke to the cries of my baby. With bleary eyes, I got up and walked over to the bassinet in the corner where he slept. I bent over to pick him up, but my hands found nothing but blankets wadded in the corner. My son wasn't in his bed. Suddenly awake now, I realised the crying wasn't coming from the room at all, but from somewhere else in the house. I left the bedroom and followed the cries immediately, knowing already where I'd find my baby, but not wanting to believe it. As soon as I opened the door to the basement, the wails grew louder and more aggressive. I flew down the stairs, nearly tumbling on the last step, and the crying suddenly stopped. The basement was completely empty. I searched for my son in every corner, but found nothing but silence and emptiness. It probably took about a minute, maybe less, to determine that the basement was empty, but it felt like much longer. I was about to give up when I heard the basement door slam and the light bulb pop. I was plunged into darkness in the basement, and my mind suddenly flashed to the letter. I saw it with such vividness in my mind that it was like I had it in front of me. Rule number 2. Always leave one light on in the basement. Rule number 3. If you misplace anything, do not look for it. I groped around in the dark for a wall and followed it to the staircase. My eyes were adjusted slightly then, but still not well enough. I crawled up the staircase on shaky limbs until I felt the door with my knuckles. I reached up and twisted the knob, but it wouldn't budge. I stood up and twisted harder, feeling it give a little, and remembering that this door didn't actually have a lock on it, which meant that the only way the knob wouldn't twist would be if someone was on the other side and holding it closed. I twisted harder and pushed at the door with my shoulder, feeling it give a little more, but not nearly enough to give me hope. I felt the darkness on my skin, as if it was somehow alive, and my skin crawled as it tightened into goosebumps. I pushed harder, yelling desperately as I heard the bottom step creak. I froze. The next step up creaked, then the next. I pounded at the door, pleading for my wife to hear, and I listened to the creaks of each step draw nearer. There was a single step between where I stood and the sound I'd been hearing, and I was just about to turn around when suddenly the door opened and I fell out. All at once, the light in the basement popped on, and I stared up at the face of my wife. "What's going on?" she asked. I saw her eyes were red and bloodshot, and the baby in her arms was crying. I scrambled to my feet and asked where she'd found him. She looked perplexed. "He was in his bassinet. I woke up because I heard you banging on the door. What's going on?" I didn't want to scare her, so I told her I thought I'd been sleepwalking. I didn't sleep at all for the rest of the night, but lay in bed, staring at the time on the alarm clock. When I got back to bed, it was 3:57 a.m.